What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel. It is time to give you a recap of the final weekend of the 2024 college football season, also known as Week 14 and also known as Rivalry Weekend. We had Rival Week this past weekend, and what a rivalry weekend it was in college football. So many great games, so many great finishes, and then also so many upsets. We saw a big upset. We'll get to that in just a moment, but we also saw some teams, lose some games where they had to make a conference championship in order to get to that conference championship. They had to win their games. And then we saw some other teams, clinch some at-large spots in the playoffs. So the regular season is now officially over. We are now heading into conference championship weekend. But again, I'm going to give you a recap here of week number 14/rivalry weekend. It pretty much began on Thursday, and we saw Memphis upset Tulane. That was a big upset there, and then we had some Friday games. How about Georgia and Georgia Tech? That was a big game going into 8 overtimes. Yeah, rivalry weekend did not disappoint. We saw a lot of fights and, some pushing and shoving. We saw a lot of flag plantings in midfield. That was the big story in rivalry weekend. A lot of these rivalries were so intense that, we had to see a lot of, a lot of people break up these scuffles between these two teams and these two rivals. But we're going to talk about it here in just a moment. Let's go ahead and get started here with my recap of Week 14. Going to give you my 5 biggest recaps of what I saw over the weekend and rivalry weekend. So we'll start here with my number 5 biggest recap. And the Big 12 championship game is set, so it's now official. It will be Arizona State versus Iowa State this Saturday in the Big 12 championship at noon Eastern time. I'm going to make a prediction on this game on Wednesday. I will be having a busy week this week. I will have my top 25 video later today, so I'm going to try to get 2 videos out in one day. And then once we get into the game previews and predictions for conference championship week, those will be coming out from Monday through Thursday. We'll have the ACC coming up tomorrow, and then Tuesday we'll have the Big 10, Big 12 on Wednesday, and then Thursday we'll close things out with the SEC. So we're going to give you game previews and predictions on all those conference championship games. But the Big 12 championship game is set. You look at Arizona State, they dominated on the road at Arizona. I mean, that was probably, a game that I didn't really see coming playing out that way. Arizona State, did not overlook Arizona. They did not look ahead to the Big 12 championship. And they didn't really have a lot of pressure, to be honest. The Sun Devils just look like a really good team, and that's what they did here against their rival Arizona. They won this game on the road at 49-7, so a big win here for the Sun Devils. They advanced to the Big 12 championship. They finish out the regular season at 10-2. And if you go back to the preseason, I was not high on Arizona State. I really didn't think they were going to be that good. I didn't really predict them to be the worst team in the Big 12, but I really kind of, predicted them to be like close to being last place in the Big 12, maybe like third to last, to be honest, out of those other 3-9 teams. Yeah, that's what I predicted them to go to, like maybe 4-8 or 3-9 if I can't remember correctly, because of how tough their schedule was. But Arizona State has proved me wrong. They're heading to the Big 12 championship. This is a really well-coached team. And then on the other side, you look at Iowa State. They defeated Kansas State in a pretty close competitive game. Iowa State proved me wrong in that game. I did predict Kansas State to go on the road and beat Iowa State just because it was like a revenge game for the Wildcats. But Iowa State proves me wrong. So both of these teams are heading to the Big 12 championship game. It will be on Saturday. It'll actually be the first conference championship game out of those Power 4. Whoever wins this game is going to be probably that number 12 seed in the, college football playoff. They're going to have to play a first-round game, but, we're going to see what happens here. I think it should be a competitive game. Now, back to what I was saying about being high on, some of these teams, Arizona State, I was not high on them. I was pretty high on Iowa State. I did talk about Iowa State being a very underrated team in the offseason, but I did not expect them to win like 10 games, to be honest. But, Iowa State, with all that experience of a roster, they knew they had to, have a really good season this year, and that's what they did. So both of these teams are 10-2 heading into the Big 12 championship game. But, yeah, the Big 12 championship game is set. It will be at Saturday at noon Eastern time. And, again, this will be the first conference championship game that will be on TV this weekend out of the Power 4 championships. So that's my number 5 biggest recap. The Big 12 championship game is set. Let's now move on to number 4. Syracuse ruins Miami's season. So the big story here in the ACC from yesterday afternoon was Miami. Miami obviously had to beat Syracuse here on the road to secure a spot in the conference championship game, and the winner would definitely play SMU. But, if Miami would have lost, they obviously would have been out of it, and Clemson would jump in there. That's exactly what happened. Syracuse upsetting Miami yesterday, and I think a lot of people predicted this upset to happen. I even predicted it as well in the offseason, and also I still didn't really change my pick. I kind of felt confident that Syracuse would definitely ruin Miami's season, and that's exactly what they did. They beat Miami 42-38. Miami started off pretty well in this game. They looked like they were going to win this game pretty easily. They got off to like a 21-0 start, and then Syracuse just rolled back. And we've seen that a lot this year in college football. Teams coming down from like 20 down, maybe in the quarter or two, maybe also in the first half, and then second half they do come back from that deficit. And that's what happened here in this game. Syracuse came back from behind 21 down, and they just came back and, played successful football. And Kyle McCord, I think people forget how good Kyle McCord is. Kyle McCord's had a great season here for Syracuse. This is not the same Kyle McCord that we saw at Ohio State from last year. This is like a different Kyle McCord that's playing really good football, and I think he has a bright future here for this Syracuse team. Don't know if he has another year of eligibility, but I think he'll probably come back for Syracuse next year. Yeah, this Syracuse team is looking pretty dangerous going into next year. I mean, obviously the season is pretty much over, but they got a bowl game to play. I tell you what, if Syracuse probably would have won 10 games, they probably would have been the ACC championship, and they probably would have been in there as a college football playoff contender. But yeah, Syracuse, this was the big story here in the ACC. Syracuse ruins Miami's season. We did see Clemson go down yesterday to South Carolina. I mean, that was a big upset there, but I really kind of, expected maybe an upset to probably happen because, like I said, Clemson, when they're Death Valley in the afternoon, it seems like they don't really play that well, but when they're at nighttime, it seems like they always play their best game. But South Carolina, Lenore Sellers just gave Clemson some problems on that defensive side of the football. And South Carolina does pull off the win, but Clemson is still heading to the ACC championship thanks to Syracuse. So it will be SMU 11-1 taking on a 9-3 Clemson team. So yeah, that should be a pretty good ACC championship game coming up on Saturday. And I think it's at 8 o'clock Eastern time if I'm not mistaken. Both the Big Ten and ACC are at 8 o'clock Eastern time. So that's my number 4 biggest recap. Syracuse ruins Miami's season. Let's now move on to my number 3 biggest recap. Notre Dame and Tennessee clinch at-large playoff spots. So a couple of teams that we had to keep an eye on over the weekend. This was definitely important for me as well. Notre Dame and Tennessee both were teams that, were trying to secure at-large bids in the playoff, and that's exactly what they did. Notre Dame defeats USC on the road 49-28. Tennessee went on the road and defeated Vanderbilt 36-23. Let's talk about Notre Dame first. It looked like, Notre Dame was having trouble in this game in the first half. The game was tied up at like 14-all, but it was a back-and-forth game. It was really back and forth. This was obviously a classic USC versus Notre Dame rivalry matchup. And, USC, obviously had a pretty good chance to not ruin, Notre Dame's playoff hopes because I feel like Notre Dame would still be in there as a 10-2 team. But I feel like Notre Dame needed this win in order to kind of finish out with a really big winning streak, and that's exactly what they did. So Notre Dame, they had a couple of pick sixes that kind of, turned this game around, and Notre Dame kind of ended up pulling away in that fourth quarter. So a couple of mistakes by USC's quarterback and, a couple of mistakes by the USC offense. That's really what changed the game here down the stretch. So Notre Dame gets a big win on the road at USC, 49-28. They'll be in a playoff spot. I really don't know if Notre Dame's going to get a first-round home game. I mean, they're 11-1. They could probably still get in there as a home. They could probably get a first-round home game. I mean, who knows? Ohio State, they did lose to Michigan. We'll get to that in just a moment. But the Fighting Irish, they get a big win at, USC, 49-28, and then Tennessee on the other side. Boy, Tennessee got off to a really slow start against Vanderbilt. It looked like, they were going to lose this game. Vanderbilt obviously has been a surprise team this year when it comes to like those, big-time games. We've seen it against Alabama and Texas. And, Vanderbilt had a pretty good chance to pull off a huge upset here, but Tennessee, they ended up pulling away in this game. It looked like the second quarter was probably Tennessee was where they woke up, and they knew they had to fight for a playoff spot, and that's exactly what they did. and I was impressed with Tennessee's defense in the second half. They really shut down the running game of Vanderbilt. Diego Pavia just could not really get things going for the running game for Vanderbilt either. And Nico Amaliaba played one of his best games, I believe, of the season. So Tennessee is looking like a pretty good team going into the playoff. But yeah, Tennessee, they secure an at-large playoff spot. I mean, they got the win over Alabama. That's going to be enough to get them in. And I just wonder if these two teams might go at it in the playoff. You never know. Notre Dame and Tennessee, two teams that secured clinch like at-large playoff spots. They could probably go at it in the first round of the playoff. We'll just have to see how far these teams go up in the rankings and then how Ohio State will drop. We'll see how far Ohio State will drop as well, but yeah, Notre Dame and Tennessee, the big picture here, they clinch at-large playoff spots because of their wins and a couple of trap games and rivalry weekends. So that's my number 3 biggest recap. Let's now get into the most important recaps here from week number 14. We'll start here with number 2, and that was the game of the weekend. Texas is heading to the SEC Championship. It's now official. So Texas, we just talked about the Big 12 and the ACC Championship. Now we can talk about the SEC Championship. It's going to be a rematch between Texas and Georgia in the SEC title game. You look at Texas and Texas A&M game from last night. Boy, it was pretty ugly. It was a defensive battle just like the Ohio State and Michigan game. Texas kind of proved that, they are the top defense in the country. I mean, Texas, like I said, is one of the top defenses in the country. And, they kind of proved that here against Texas A&M. This game was pretty physical. It wasn't really a great offensive performance by both of these teams. Texas A&M had the 1 pick six and everything. That was about it, a defensive touchdown, but their offense just could not get past this Texas defense. And you look at Texas, they did make some explosive plays on the offensive side of the football when they had to. Quinn Ewers, he wasn't 100% going into this game, but he did step up and, got the win here for his team. So, yeah, it's going to be a rematch here between Texas and Georgia in the regular season in the SEC title game. Georgia defeated this Texas team 30-15. But, Texas, their defense was the top defense in the country going to that game. But Georgia kind of proved that they were the better defense than Texas back in that regular season game. I think it's going to be a different story, but I think Texas's offense will be a lot more better, and I think they'll be definitely ready for that Georgia defense coming up on Saturday. We'll just have to wait and see, but again, I was really impressed with Texas's performance on the defensive side of the football against Texas A&M, and I'm really excited to see what this rivalry looks like in the future, but yeah, Texas with a big win. They went on the road in Kyle Field in one of the toughest places to play, and also College Station, Texas. I did pick Texas to lose this game, not in the offseason, but I did change my pick to Texas A&M pulling off the upset. But Texas A&M just could not do anything to really get past this Texas defense. So that was the big story there. Texas is heading to the SEC Championship. That's my number 2 biggest recap. Again, they'll play Georgia coming up on Saturday at 4 o'clock Eastern Time on ABC. And then we go to my number 1 biggest recap. We can now talk about the Big Ten, and that is Michigan still owns Ohio State. So the game of not the weekend, but the game, Michigan versus Ohio State, one of the most intense rivalries in all of college football. Michigan upsets Ohio State. This was the biggest upset of the weekend, in my opinion. You got Michigan, that was a 6-5 team that was really up and down, and they were a 23-point underdog going into this game. It was at like 21, to begin the week, and then, of course, later in the week, it went up to 23. They gave Michigan no chance in this game to win against Ohio State on the road. Ohio State was going to finally snap that losing streak, but that did not happen. Michigan beats Ohio State for the 4th year in a row. And this game was actually pretty ugly. It was kind of like the Texas A&M and Texas game. It was a defensive battle. Both defenses were pretty much even the whole entire game. I mean, offensively, both teams really turned the ball over a few times. Both quarterbacks really struggled in this game. And, the running game for Michigan was probably the difference. Michigan's running game was definitely the strength in this game. Ohio State really didn't have much strength in this game on the offensive side of the football, maybe except for their receivers. But I tell you what, I think Chip Kelly really made some bad calls here and bad decisions in this game for this Ohio State offense, and that was pretty much the difference there. I think Chip Kelly just made a lot of bad calls in this game, and, as an offensive coordinator for Ohio State. And Ryan Day just can't seem to beat Michigan. Ever since he got here in 2019, he's only beat them one time, and Michigan has now beaten him for like 4 years in a row. Even without Jim Harbaugh, this Michigan team defeats them. So 13-10 was the final score in this game, and the aftermath was just crazy after this game as well. You play for 60 minutes. Michigan tried to plant the flag in midfield, and you could see how intense this rivalry was. You know, there were players getting into pushing and shoving matches. I think there was like 3 fights in the aftermath of this game, and, you know, the officers had to, like, you know, pepper spray a couple of Michigan players. That's how intense this rivalry is, but what a victory here for Michigan. I mean, this is a Michigan team that's been up and down all year long, and they get a huge win here on the road at Ohio State. Now, the Big Ten championship game is changed. It's going to be Penn State versus Oregon now. Oregon took care of business against Washington. Penn State took care of Maryland. So we'll get a top 5 showdown in the Big Ten championship. I'm really anxious to see how that game goes, but also I'm really anxious to see how far Ohio State drops in the playoff rankings and, you know, where they're going to be at in the playoff bracket as well. I still think they're in the college football playoff. Ohio State fans probably don't need to worry about being out of the playoff. I mean, they'll probably just be in a first-round game. That's pretty much all I can say about Ohio State. But, yeah, the Big Ten championship is now different. It's going to be Penn State versus Oregon. Like I said, those conference championship game predictions are going to be coming this week. But, yeah, Michigan still owns Ohio State. This was a very intense game. Michigan beats Ohio State for the 4th year in a row. So those are my 5 biggest recaps here from the final weekend of this 2024 college football season. It's been an incredible regular season. We are now heading into the postseason. This is pretty much where you start like 0-0 again. You got bowl games coming up. You got the 12-team playoff right around the corner in a couple more weeks. So let me guys know what you think about week number 14. Was it pretty exciting for you? And give me your 5 biggest recaps down in the comments below. Thanks for watching this video, and stay tuned for more sports content videos on my Lucas Ross Sports YouTube channel.